This was a big weekend for Big 12 wrestling. Starting out the Reno Tournament of Champions, Wyoming had a phenomenal weekend, placing second at the tournament, losing only by a close margin to Oregon State, who ended up winning the whole thing with 5 champions. A very dominant showing by Oregon State out on the West Coast in Nevada. Now, Wyoming ended up having 4 champions themselves, and so that means that both of those teams combined had 9 of the 10 possible champions. Who was the other champion? That was actually Cam Pine of Clarion, who's having a pretty good season himself, 19-3 on the season so far. It's good to see a guy from Clarion get in there, a smaller school, a smaller program, really showing guys on the national stage. Now, what else happened this weekend? Let's stop stalling and start talking wrestling. What's going on, wrestling fans? My name's Josiah, and welcome to Fanco Wrestling, your source for college wrestling news and discussion. And the first bit of news that I want to talk about is actually my Patreon over the weekend. Now, you may have seen me release a video, a pretty emotional video on the channel discussing the future of Fanco Wrestling and the outpouring of support. Not that I didn't necessarily expect it, but I guess I didn't expect so many comments and so much support. And whether you decided to comment your support of Fanco Wrestling or share financially in your support of Fanco Wrestling, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. You know, it's helping to grow this channel to where I want it to be and to where I know you want it to be as well. So thank you so much. If you haven't checked out the video, I recommend that you watch it if you enjoy Fanco Wrestling. And if not, I have actually the Patreon link down below. So let's get on to the weekend of actual what happened in wrestling news, and that's David Carr and was looking pretty good at the Iowa State and Purdue dual meet. Now, Iowa State and Purdue wrestled in a high school gym, which is not necessarily something that happens often in college wrestling, but they wrestled at Humboldt High School in Iowa, which is the head coach of Coach Dresser of Iowa State and Coach Tony Ursuline of Purdue. And Iowa State ended up winning this dual meet 23-13, earning Coach Dresser actually his 200th career dual meet victory, which was a pretty impressive feat for him and for Iowa State. Now, this duel was highlighted by the match at 157 pounds, where David Carr took on Kendall Coleman. David Carr, last year's NCAA champion, is looking to do it again this year, and I'll get to why he's looking so good in just a second. But Kendall Coleman, a top 15 ranked wrestler of Purdue. Now, Carr ended up getting a takedown at the end of the first period, a pretty sick takedown on the end of the mat, ended up riding out Coleman the rest of that period, chose bottom, escaped, and then, man, that's when he really started putting on the heat, because it was actually a pretty close match up until that point, but then that's when David Carr ended up hitting his takedown, let up on Coleman, kind of started tiring him out a bit, then ended up getting him in a cross wrist tilt and pinning Kendall Coleman in the tilt. That is something, again, that doesn't happen often in college wrestling. And it's always impressive when, or just in wrestling in general, but it's impressive when somebody's able to pin somebody else in a tilt, especially when they're a top 15 ranked wrestler in the country. I'm telling you that David Carr, he's not playing this year, and he's coming for that Hodge Trophy. You may not even think that he's in contention because you have Spencer Lee and Gable Stevenson, and yeah, that's true, but he's wrestled a lot more matches than them so far this season. He has 6 of his 8 wins by bonus point victories so far. And he has the second longest winning streak in the NCAA. Yes, that's above Spencer Lee. Yes, that's above Gable, only behind Yanni Diakobahalis. David Carr, like I said, he's not playing this year. Another Big 12 team that did very well this weekend was Oklahoma State, who pummeled Air Force in Wyoming. I wasn't necessarily expecting the scores to be this bad, but they beat Air Force 45-0, then beat Wyoming 30-3. Pretty good victories for Oklahoma State. They advanced to 6-0 on the season so far. Now, let me just talk a few things about this. The usual suspects are rolling. You know, Carter Young is looking pretty good on the year so far. Continue that this weekend. Dayton Fix is looking absolutely lethal, better than he ever has, kind of in my opinion. I mean, he is just getting bonus point upon bonus point. He had 2 bonus point victories over the weekend. Another guy of Oklahoma State who had bonus points over the weekend was Travis Whitley. Dustin Plott's also looking good, and one more guy that's really looking good for Oklahoma State and looked good this weekend with a ranked win. Can you guess? I'm just playing out here on the mat. Who am I? AJ Ferrari was also looking good. Now, AJ Ferrari had a pretty good match with Stephen Buchanan of Wyoming at 197 pounds. They last wrestled in the Big 12 championships when AJ Ferrari won that. And back then, it was a big match for him. And it was it was still a big match for him. Now a top 10 ranked matchup here. Now AJ Ferrari won 4-2 with a takedown and a reversal. A pretty sick reversal in the third period, if I do say so myself. Within I think it was 5 seconds, he's able to get the reversal and end up winning. Now Oklahoma State next up has Utah Valley on Monday night. But I do want to mention this before we get on to the next topic, is that don't count out Oklahoma State, and I hope that you're not. I know if you're in the Big 12, you're certainly not counting them out. But the thing is, there's been a lot of Michigan talk in the news recently with Suriano and Michich and Amin and Mass and all. But don't count out how dominant Oklahoma State has been performing this year. They're definitely going to be a top 3 team contenders. Now, next up, another dual meet that's happening right now, actually a bunch of dual meets, are the the collegiate wrestling duels. Sorry, not the nationals, the collegiate wrestling duels. Common, kind of error that a lot of people have been messing up, but the collegiate duels are happening right now live on Rockfin. You can watch with an active subscription. That's $9.99 a month and then a $10 pay-per-view, and I have everything linked up down in the description below. If you've been following along with videos on the channel, there's so many tough teams there. I actually have it up in another tab open right now, kind of watching as I'm working. I've just been watching all day, but Iowa, Mizzou, Virginia Tech, Penn State, NC State, more teams. Are all wrestling this weekend. And a few big notes from day one, if you're just looking for little tidbits. Spencer Lee is weighed in. We weren't sure if he was going to be wrestling at this event, but he has weighed in. One guy who didn't weigh in was Bryce Andonian of Virginia Tech, for whatever reason that may be. I wish we would have been able to see a match with him and Yanni Diakomahalis. That would have been pretty crazy, but Andonian didn't weigh in. And Vito Aruja, speaking of weight changes, speaking of weigh-ins, he's actually weighed in at 125, so that's where he will be wrestling now, which is kind of interesting that he's not going 133, which is where he wrestled a match already this season. And in other news over the weekend, Spider-Man opened up in theaters, and maybe it's not a piece of wrestling news, but it's a piece of news that I wanted to talk about because of how much I loved the movie, and I'm interested in seeing if you saw the Spider-Man movie as well. If you did see it and you liked it, leave a comment with a spider emoji down below. But I mentioned in my Patreon video last week that I haven't really been able to go to a lot of movies recently, and it is true. So this is the first time I was able to get back out, and man, was it amazing. Spider-Man's one of my favorite superheroes, so I was so happy to be able to sit in a theater and watch him on the big screen. Spider-Man No Way Home. And again, I'm not going to get into any spoilers, but lots of cameos, lots of callbacks to the old Spider-Man movies that I watched whenever I was growing up. Did you see it? Did you like it? I loved it, and now after we're done with the movies, I'm just excited to be watching wrestling all week with the collegiate wrestling duels. Thanks again to Patreon members. I'll be updating the names down below in an upcoming video, but until then, thanks for watching.